Welcome to part 4 of the legacy of Nixon. Now we're going to talk about the fall of Nixon. So the investigation into the Nixon administration and the Watergate break-in is not going to go away. It's going to continue to broaden, right? Elliot L. Richardson is going to replace Kleindienst as Attorney General. The Nixon administration is actually going to select a Harvard law professor named Archibald Cox as a special prosecutor to investigate the Watergate break-in, right? But the U.S. Senate's going to get involved as well. In May of 1973, the Senate is going to create a special committee headed by Senator Sam J. Ervin of North Carolina. And this is going to be known as the Ervin Committee. And they're going to begin televised hearings on the break-in and begin calling in witnesses. Okay? Now, things are looking pretty bad already. And John W. Dean III, right? John Dean is going to begin to think, hold on a second. I think they're trying to make me the fall guy. And when he realized that they were probably going to start pinning everything onto him, he begins talking. He begins giving testimony. And he even implies that perhaps some of these conversations were recorded, right? Well, who would know about this, right? Well, the answer was a man named Alexander P. Butterfield. Alexander Butterfield was an aide to the president, and he had actually supervised the installation of tape recorders. You see, Lyndon Johnson had tape recorders in the White House, and when Nixon took office, he had the tape recorders all pulled out. He goes, I don't know if I want everything I say recorded. But then he got to thinking about it. He goes, wait a minute, I get why he did that. It was to record my legacy. So he had them reinstalled. Alexander Butterfield is going to supervise this, right? But Johnson had a thing where he had to push a button to get to start recording, so it'd only record when he pushed the button. Nixon thought, oh, I'll forget to do that, so he had a lot of these recorders were voice activated. Butterfield gets contacted to come testify. He doesn't want to come testify. He's moved on. He's no longer in the White House. He's taken on a job as the head of the Federal Aviation Administration, right? But they say, we need you to talk about the tapes. And he's like, oh, crap, the tapes. Fine. So he comes in front of the Senate on July 16th, 1973, he discloses at the Senate, at the Ervin Committee hearings, that yes, there is indeed a set of recording systems in the White House and that these conversations are being recorded. Okay? Now, for the Ervin Committee, this is a huge revelation, right? And so now the next effort is going to be, how do we get the tapes? We need to get the tapes. So on July 23rd, 1973, both Special Prosecutor Archibald Cox and the Ervin Committee are going to ask for these tapes, right? Nixon is going to refuse to give them over. He's going to say, no, executive privilege, you can't have them. National security, there's stuff on there that can't be out there for public consumption, right? So, of course, they're going to go to the courts. Judge Sirica is going to issue an order for Nixon to turn the tapes over, and he's still going to stonewall. He's going to say no, right? By October, a U.S. Court of Appeals will have heard the case, and they're going to uphold the decision of Sirica and say, no, you have to turn these tapes over, right? Nixon's response to this is like, well, I'll tell you what, we won't turn the tapes over because of national security and executive privilege and all, but we'll provide you with written summaries of what the tapes have on them and in exchange for not asking us for any more documents, all right? Now, both Archibald Cox and the Ervin Committee reject this order. But remember, Archibald Cox was appointed by the president himself as a special prosecutor. So on October 20th, Richard Nixon orders the Attorney General Richardson, to fire Archibald Cox. Well, Attorney General Richardson refuses. He says, no, I'm not going to do that. It would be unethical. And rather than fire Archibald Cox, he will resign. So the Assistant Attorney General William Ruckelshaus then is ordered by the president to fire Cox. And again, he resigns. So finally, Nixon has to find somebody that he can temporarily appoint to Attorney General to fire Cox. He finds the Solicitor General Robert Bork that says, okay, yeah, sure, I'll do it, right? So he appoints him basically acting Attorney General, and Cox is fired, right? So everything is beginning to, excuse the pun, unravel here, right? By December 8th, 1973, under pressure and public protest, Nixon is finally going to release the tapes. but only 7 of the 9 tapes that were subpoenaed, right? 2 of them, they'll say, we lost them. We can't find them. We don't know where they are. They're maybe in our other pants. We don't know, right? But on the 7 tapes they did turn in, another suspicious thing pops up. On one of those 7 tapes, a gap of 18.5 minutes were accidentally erased. Now, officially, the woman who had copied the tape said, yeah, no, I must have accidentally done that. Now, we've done a lot of analysis over of this section of 18.5 section of tape over the years. Anytime some new technology to look at it, try and see what the heck was on it, we try it. And it's very clear that this tape wasn't erased. It was scrubbed. In other words, whatever was across that 18.5 minutes, a very deliberate effort was made to scrub any traces of that recording off. Now, there was enough evidence on those 7 tapes delivered to impeach and convict the President of the United States, right? So it only makes you wonder, what the heck was on that 18.5 minutes, right? By the beginning of 1974, several former White House aides were either under indictment or had pled guilty to different crimes. By May of 1974, the House Judiciary Committee is going to initiate a formal impeachment inquiry. They're going to begin the process to impeach the president. On the 20th of May, Sirica is going to order Nixon to turn over some additional tapes to the new special prosecutor, the one that replaces Archibald Cox, Leon Jaworski, right? And on the 24th of July, the U.S. Supreme Court is going to order Nixon to provide transcripts to these tapes. So the entire thing for the Nixon administration is completely coming unglued. So between the 27th and 30th of July of 1974, the House of Representatives, the House Judiciary Committee, is going to issue 3 articles of impeachment to go in front of the full House, right, for a vote, right? By August 5th, 1974, Nixon is going to release transcripts of 3 more tapes, right? These 3 tapes are going to clearly implicate the Nixon into the Watergate cover-up, right? One of them that was recorded on June 23rd, 1972 is often referred to as the smoking gun tape, right? This tape would include a request by Richard Nixon to H.R. Haldeman to pressure the FBI to, quote, don't go any further into this case, period, right? So asking his aide to directly try and pressure the FBI to back off, right? So finally on August 8th, Nixon has realized that all his support is completely evaporated, that this impeachment, the 3 articles of impeachment are going to hit the House and they're going to clearly pass, and he's not even going to be impeached, he's probably going to be convicted. He decides, well, it's time for him to walk away. So he gets on the television that evening of August 8th and he makes an announcement that he's going to resign the presidency effective noon the following day, August 9th, 1974. As he addressed his own staff in his farewell there to the White House, he said something I think is kind of a little bit ironic in a way. He says, and so I say to you on this occasion we leave. Always give your best. Never get discouraged. Never be petty. Always remember that others may hate you, but those who hate you don't win unless you hate them, and then you destroy yourself, which is exactly what he did. So on August 9th, 1974, at 11:35 a.m., he's going to board Marine One, and he's going to leave the White House for the last time. The result of this is that Gerald Ford is going to become President of the United States. Now, this is kind of an interesting president in a lot of ways. He holds a unique place in history. He's the only unelected president of the United States. Every other president has been elected to the office. They were either elected to the presidency or they were elected to the vice presidency that succeeded to the president when the president had died, right? But not Gerald Ford. He was never a vice presidential candidate. When Nixon ran for re-election in 1972, his vice presidential candidate was a man named Spiro Agnew. But Spiro Agnew had already resigned before Nixon for an entirely unrelated set of scandals. He was accused of taking bribes, right? And in order to avoid prosecution, he agreed just to resign instead. So he resigned on October 10th, 1973, after he would plead no contest to tax evasion, right? Ford is going to be the first person appointed to the vice presidency under the provisions of the 25th Amendment, which had only been ratified in 1967 after the Kennedy assassination, right? Prior to that, there was no mechanism to replace a vice president. So he's the first one that's going to do that. Now, the first question asked is, what is he going to do about Nixon? All right, is he going to let him get convicted? Well, on September 8th, a month after he takes office, or just shy of that, 1974, he is going to issue Proclamation 4311, which is going to give Richard Nixon a full unconditional pardon for any crimes that he might have committed as President of the United States. Woodworth is going to call Bernstein and say, the son of a bitch, pardon the son of a bitch, right? And a lot of people will be pretty upset about it, right? Gerald Ford will explain it, though, when he was a guest on the Dick Cavett show, which was an equivalent of the Tonight Show kind of format, right? He was on the Dick Cavett show, and Dick Cavett asked him directly, says, why? Why did you do this? Why did you let him off the hook? And this is what Gerald Ford had to say. He said, there was a basic decision that I had to decide on whether the fate of an individual was more important than the problems of the nation as a whole. He's talking about Special Prosecutor Jaworski, he said that if Nixon is indicted, it would be at least a year before he could be brought to trial. And if he was brought to trial, it would take some time for the trial to proceed. And if he were convicted, he could appeal it all the way up to the Supreme Court. And the best estimates that we got, that it would be anywhere from as short as 2 years to as long as 6. And during that time span, and all during that time span, there would be headlines saying former President Nixon this and former President Nixon that. And I wanted to try and heal the country, not allow it to tear itself apart. Right? So he had decided to let Nixon off the hook. That first sentence when he says the fate of an individual is more important, or asking the question whether the fate of an individual is more important than the problems of the nation, he might have been talking about himself, because he knew by doing this he was committing political suicide. And sure enough, in 1976, when he runs to try and achieve the presidency by electoral vote, he's going to lose to a rather small-time candidate named Jimmy Carter.